Welcome back to Cities Skylines 2, something a little bit different today. This is the city that I've built. You might have seen it once or twice before. It's the city, unfortunately, of Poophole, named during a live stream. A little immature. However, in this video I want to share with you the story of Poophole and the lessons that I learned along the way, growing a city to 135k. Let's start with small towns and big cities. One of the things that I really like about Cities Skylines 2, and we'll talk about its downsides a bit later, is 1, the beautiful photo mode that you'll see many times in this video, and 2, more importantly, the size of the map. Again, something we'll return to when we talk about services, but what it does allow is the creation of big cities and small towns. And to be honest, it's something I wish I actually led into a little bit more. I was a bit hesitant, but I really like this area across the river. As you can see in some actual gameplay, not some beautiful cinematic shots, what I tried to do here was start with a small town, mostly residential, but it ended up having a little bit of a CBD develop, with some 2x2 office buildings, my favorite type of high-density office building in the center, and then mostly residential around the outside. I tried to do the same here in the city of Poophole. A few high-rise buildings sort of leading your way in to the CBD to try and reflect a kind of natural growth in cities. Another way I tried to reflect that natural growth that I'd encourage you to do as well is by making the roads just a little bit unusual. Now, partly that's because, to be frank, I'm not a beautiful city designer. If you're looking for a trailer-worthy city, this might not be the video for you, but what I do love are the trees planted early, or these little side streets that you can use on the edge of your suburbs to make it look a little bit like it's an area that just isn't quite as developed as the rest. You could opt for dirt roads there too, but for me, everything that we've discussed, those little roads, the trees, the sort of hinterland area of a city, that outskirts area, is kind of the area that almost ended up impressing me the most. Combine it with that industrial area you see right there, those farms, and I think it creates this kind of quaint small town vibe outside of this, the much larger city centre. Moving on to my next reflection. Small leaves, early and often. We've kind of touched on it a little bit already. Trees take a long time to grow in Cities Skylines 2. So one thing that I learned building this city is that I need to plant them early and often. Also in and around big service districts like this one, the sort of MI5, or maybe the smaller roads, something I spent, to be frank, far too much time doing, because you have to place these things down individually, one click at a time. My RSI has never been quite this bad since playing Cities Skylines 2. Of course, you have the brush tool as well for that broad paint, but for me, one of the things that I knew I loved in Cities 1, that I still love in Cities 2, it's placing down the props individually. Now, in the base game, we're still pretty limited, to be honest, in the kinds of functions that we can use. So primarily, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, place trees early and often. I'd encourage you to use the little shrubs like I have here as a kind of a design piece. I like to draw them either on those awkward bits of terrain or to kind of border those awkward bits. Another thing that I really love to do is paint the map in bushes, just like here. It actually started as an accident. I placed down a few too many in a cluster one time and thought, hey, actually, we can do something with this. And sure enough, we can. I think this is such a simple thing to do, but it looks fantastic. And honestly, I wish I'd done it on a much larger scale. If it didn't take so much time, maybe I would. And of course, as we step back, you can see the trees too. Here, probably the brush tool, much more helpful in painting those big forests in and around the hinterland of my city. That kind of external area where people aren't really living, but we could develop it in future. Also inside of little urban parks, here I created a gated community, kind of, using the sound barriers of the highways to effectively wall off the zone of parks. And again, just outside of that, using what we can plop individually, unfortunately not park benches yet in Cities 2, but trees. I think they're also pretty cool in and around historical areas or signature buildings. Obviously, Notre Dame looks fantastic day or night, especially down from the citizen level, I think. It's particularly striking. Moving through to something that might be slightly less striking. Special interest zones. This is what I pretentiously call not the specialized industry that you may have and should have already planned out, but instead these specific focus areas in my city, like this island. Probably my favorite one. I get slight Auckland Sky Tower vibes from the center, and obviously this statue around the outside with those trees, again, planted early and often, I think is a really nice touch. Here we see two specialist areas, one on the left for tourists and officers, and then on the right with the Ferris wheel. Big time fun. When it comes to actual playing this out in gameplay, of course Cities 2 presents us with a district tool, similar to Cities 1, and here I've tried to enact some policies that kind of felt like they would be right for this area, the Island of Bliss, where people recycle, pay a shite load to the city for their parking, I don't know, and there are also lots of speed bumps, because this is a place where you should drive slowly and take in the wealthy view. And that was the idea, a wealthy island with beautiful attractions just outside of the city, sitting just off the bay there. I think it looks awesome, to be honest. Again, I'm not a city designer by any stretch, but another area, special interest area that I liked was this college area, particularly in and around the college football stand, which is particularly big, right? Obviously. Here you'll see some of the things that we've talked about already, including the blending of zones to try and build up kind of a studentville, if you will, with slightly higher density, in this case medium density housing, public transport routes, places to park your cars. This is college sports at its best. Moving through to the quote-unquote right lanes and left-handed traffic. I do think that left-handed traffic in City Skylines 2 may not function as well as right-hand traffic, but regardless, you'll probably notice people really suck at merging lanes. Like, so bad. They leave it till the last minute, they cause everybody to stop, and they swerve in front of them. Now, this could just be a left-hand traffic issue, and we've certainly had plenty of fun debates about that. I believe, and here's something I've prepared just for you in Paint, that left is best. Why? Well, when you're driving on the left, you can actually defend yourself in the just, using your dominant hand to strike your foe. Whereas on the right-hand side, as you can see, things get messy. You are not going to be able to defend yourself there, friend. So, my conclusion, aside from emotions and national politics and all that garbage, is that left is best. It will leave you in the best footing, and right is wrong, unless the majority of people are left-handed. Commonly people will say, well, it's right because it's right, and I agree, it's fair and just, accurate, precise, appropriately fitting, sane, healthy, wing, suitably fair, justly beneficial, privileged without delay, and righteously morally just. It is quite a confused word compared to left. That aside though, I've probably offended most of my audience long enough now. Let's get back to City Skylines 2 and this horrendous left-hand traffic, or maybe more broadly, traffic merging. One of the solutions that I found playing was using some of the new road tools. Just kidding, it wasn't. Although you might be able to assign lanes. The way that I chose to do it was by making sure that the number of lanes actually aligns well with the outlets, with the off-ramps. Here, I've changed it from 5 lanes to 4, and I've observed, at least in this small example, that it works much better. The traffic is in their lane earlier, I believe. Again, I don't have evidence for this. It is more of a discussion video, but I think that this is at least a reasonable solution. Kind of common sense maybe. Make sure that the number of lanes going in are the same as out. Next up, Chonky services and my own bad planning. The services in City Skylines 2 maybe could take some of the blame for my bad planning because they're pretty big. To be fair, I'm not necessarily talking about education or healthcare or even the prison that I chose to bundle right the way out here in a smoky waste landfill-infested zone. The airport, though, naturally, pretty big. I mean, it's got to take planes into account, but it's still pretty dang big. Other services like the Central Intelligence Bureau are quite large, but of course, they're kind of one-off things, so maybe it's not the end of the world. Likewise, with the port, the basic one fairly small, the cargo harbour, huge. Although that might not be an issue for you if you don't have ocean. So back to the airports. The international airport, by far and away the largest. I'm not quite sure why, except for obviously the extra capacity for extra planes. The length of the runway is the same as the small airport, so it probably can't handle larger planes. And the game can't handle placing it down either, as you can see. Another one of those unfortunate downsides at the moment. In this journey in Cities 2 anyway. The airport itself is probably one of the largest services in the game. Leaves a horrendous mark if you choose to burn it down, but you can get rid of that pretty easily, so it's probably not the end of the world. But it does take up, I would say, 9 tiles. It's just too big for 4. And that's pretty dang big in Cities 2 when you think about it. Sure, we've got all of these extra tiles. I thought, great. My city in this game is going to be completely ginormous compared to 1. In reality, I don't think that's quite true. Things are big, of course, and maybe the tiles are smaller, and when you combine that together, you end up with, at least what I feel like, is definitely a larger world, but it's not a grandiose world. I am still confined within its limits, and I don't feel like I can stretch out an extraordinary amount compared to Cities 1 anyway. At least I can't stretch out as far as the welfare office, which if you saw my very first video on City Skylines 2, you'll know is probably the award winner for the most ridiculous service. Not because it's necessarily stupidly big, but the irony of this agency spending a whole load of money on a luxurious building. I think that's what lets it take the cake. Next up, no money, no problems. Weirdly, in Cities 2, and at least in my journey in building this city, where I have 125 million bucks, I've found, and I'm sure you've found too, because the game is slightly broken at this point. Basically, the economy simulation doesn't really matter so much, or at least it didn't for me. Maybe I had an extraordinary number of services that kept me afloat, or maybe the government subsidies did, I don't know. But I found that I didn't need to take out a loan. Whereas in Cities 1, I'm skint. I'm like constantly loaned, constantly trying to grow and earn money. Here, I found not only can I lower my taxes, but I can lower them considerably, improving citizen happiness, generating more wealth from having wealthier people, and because of the game's weird, maybe slightly janky economics in the background, particularly around those government subsidies, where it's basically pandemic policy, print as much as you like, and worry about the downside consequences later, it doesn't seem to matter. Honestly, it doesn't. Up your city budgets. Absolutely you should. It'll help with growth, it'll help with wealth, it'll help with development, and it doesn't seem to hinder your economy, because as you can see, government subsidies simply go up. Just print more money. They've doubled in this case, in just this small clip. Of course, I have raised my budgets quite a bit, but I think this goes to show, at least in a small anecdotal example, that you don't need to worry so much about money in Cities 2. Just go nuts. Next up, not much to see here, folks. Specifically, I'm talking about some of the things that I love or want more of in the final parts of this video. And tunnels, oh man, I love these things. Do I use them obsessively and excessively? Yes. Are they pretty? No. Are my ones pretty? Especially not. Do they work? Absolutely yes. These things are my efficiency kings, even when I design them like snakes underneath the ground. Pop out traffic from one industrial zone to the next. From your port, right the way across the city. Or, in one of my favorite touches, build an underground tunnel near the ocean. Not only is this one, I think, quite visually satisfying, but it also fills with water. Hopefully when the editor and mods come out, we might be able to play around with water a little bit more. But of course, this city is, unfortunately, named Poophole, after the giant poop hole in the middle, where we pumped out all of our sewage early in the game. It's probably not particularly desirable. Next, but Mom, I want more! This is my final section of the video. I'm going to reflect on things missing and some other points about 2. I really miss proper key roads, or actually more importantly, I just want to see them. I'm not sure we've ever fully had them. Unfortunately, at the moment, the workarounds are pretty janky in Cities 2, and if you let the game just do what it does this. So, fairly mixed results around terrain, around water. Trees, though, obviously, happy to say, love them. Brilliant to place down, stylize your buildings, run with your heart in your hand, in your sleeve, I should say. I also think that the citizen streets, these pedestrian streets, are an awesome win for cramming buildings into a tiny space while keeping the number of cars down, though I would like to see more options here with pathways. I find myself, like I did here with Notre Dame, having to use basically small streets where I wanted to use footpaths. It's disappointing, especially considering the suite of road tools that were newly introduced in Cities 2, like the grid layout, like extra options and signage and traffic rules for your streets. It's a shame to see we didn't just get a little bit more. Likewise with these public transport routes here that I think the bus lanes look really cool, I would have liked to see bike lanes too. Where are my bike lanes at? I want bike lanes so bad, I'm not even a cyclist. However, as I've mentioned earlier, I do love the photo mode and the signature buildings. I think that those two things combine great for someone like me, but even just for the average player, I think that the signature buildings are brilliant. I also think, surprisingly, that public transport turned out to be something that was actually pretty easy to use for me. I always find it, I don't know about you, but slightly daunting to place all the stops, routes, and make sure they're on the right side of the road, and then you've forgotten to put a bit of track somewhere and you have to go out of it and into it. I just find it quite administrative. And while there was still a little bit of an element to that in this city, it wasn't too bad. Though to be fair, I ignored public transit for a long time, and I should probably use subways in my next city given my love for the underground. Thank you for joining me today in this, the story of Poophole, my journey from 0 to 135,000 population citizens in this city. Obviously I haven't shown the full gameplay. If you'd like to see proper gameplay videos of Cities 2, I'd be so happy to make them. I just don't think that anyone will watch them, so I don't. But please do let me know. And also, share your thoughts about Poophole. No, I'll see you next time.